The guards at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou moved with practiced precision through their midnight rotations, their boots echoing against marble corridors that had witnessed decades of political upheaval. They were protecting the palace from outside enemies, vigilant against the threats they could see coming. None of them suspected that the real danger had already slipped past their defenses, moving through the shadows with intimate knowledge of every camera angle, every blind spot, every weakness in their carefully constructed security web. President Ibrahim Traoré lay sprawled across his bed in the private quarters of the West Wing, still wearing his military uniform from the day's endless meetings. His polished boots sat neatly beside the bed, a habit ingrained from his years as a captain, when order and discipline were the thin lines between life and death. But tonight, fatigue gripped his body like iron chains. The weight of leading a nation under constant threat had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his shoulders bore the invisible burden of millions of lives depending on his decisions. It had been another brutal day in a series of brutal days. Dawn had brought emergency briefings about terrorist movements in the northern provinces. By noon, he was mediating between competing factions within his own government, men who smiled to his face while sharpening knives for his back. The afternoon had delivered reports of foreign interference, shadowy figures moving money and weapons across borders with impunity. Evening brought threats, phone calls with electronically disguised voices promising death, letters with photos of his family members, messages that made his blood run cold. Ibrahim had learned to carry these burdens silently. A president could not afford to show fear, could not let the cracks in his armor become visible to those who would exploit them. But here, in the sanctuary of his private chambers, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. His eyelids grew heavy as exhaustion finally claimed him. For the first time in 48 hours, he let his guard down and surrendered to sleep. Even unconscious, however, Ibrahim Traoré was not defenseless. Years of surviving coups, assassination attempts, and political warfare had honed his instincts to razor sharpness. His loaded pistol rested beneath his pillow, safety off, finger grooves worn smooth from countless nights of restless vigilance. The door sensor remained active, its silent red light blinking steadily in the darkness. A nearly invisible wire connected to his watch would vibrate at the slightest unauthorized entry. Nothing happened in this palace without his knowing. Or, so he believed. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence, its rhythmic whirring masking smaller sounds that might otherwise alert a sleeping man. The palace felt calm, secure, wrapped in layers of protection that had kept him alive through 5 years of increasingly dangerous presidency. But security, Ibrahim had learned, was often an illusion. The most dangerous enemies were not those who scaled walls or forced doors. They were the ones who already had keys. What no one in the security detail knew, what no camera would record, what no intelligence report had anticipated, was that Ibrahim's own sister was at that very moment moving through the palace corridors like a ghost. Awa Traoré, 34 years old, mother of 2, had spent weeks memorizing guard rotations and studying surveillance patterns. She knew which cameras had blind spots and which hallways fell outside the electronic web of protection. More importantly, she had help from the inside. Someone within the palace security apparatus had quietly disabled the motion sensors for exactly 20 minutes. Just enough time. Awa moved through the West Wing with the fluid grace of someone who had grown up in these halls back when their father served as a minor government official, and the palace was just a workplace, not a fortress. She wore no shoes. Their soft leather soles had been abandoned at the servants' entrance to prevent any sound from betraying her presence. No jewelry adorned her body. Even her wedding ring sat hidden in a small box at home. Every element that might catch light or create noise had been carefully removed. Her steps were absolutely silent, each footfall placed with surgical precision on the marble floors she had played on as a child. The guards she passed in the corridors barely glanced at her. She was family, after all. Her face was known, her presence unremarkable. The Traoré name opened doors that would remain locked to any stranger, and tonight she was exploiting that trust in the most unthinkable way. Even the bodyguard stationed directly outside Ibrahim's door had been lured away. A carefully crafted emergency message bearing Ibrahim's stolen digital seal and signature had been transmitted through the palace communication system 23 minutes earlier. The message reported an unauthorized drone spotted over the East Wing Gardens, a potential assassination attempt that demanded immediate investigation by senior security personnel. Palace protocol was absolute in such matters. Any breach of airspace required personal verification by the highest-ranking guards available. The deception was perfect in its simplicity. The guard outside Ibrahim's door, a decorated veteran named Sergeant Konate, who had saved the president's life twice in the past year, left his post without hesitation. His loyalty and dedication, the very qualities that made him invaluable, had been turned against him. He was now on the opposite side of the complex, searching for a threat that existed only in the imagination of those who had orchestrated this night's events. Awa reached into her sleeve and withdrew a duplicate access card, a perfect copy of the presidential aide's key card that she had managed to clone during a family dinner 2 nights prior. The aide, a young man named Marcus, who treated her with the deference due to the president's sister, had been distracted by her children's questions about his work while she performed the 15-second procedure that would seal her brother's fate. She held her breath and pressed the card against the electronic panel beside the door. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint green light blinked once, followed by the soft mechanical click of disengaging locks. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet corridor, but no alarms sounded, no guards came running. The door opened just wide enough for her to slip inside. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the pale glow of city lights filtering through heavy curtains. Awa closed the door behind her with infinite care, leaving it slightly ajar. An escape route if everything went wrong. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. In her right hand, she gripped a compact black pistol, its barrel fitted with a military-grade silencer that would muffle the gunshot to barely more than a whisper. She stood in the corner of the room, half hidden by shadows, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her brother's chest as he slept. A single bead of sweat traced its way down her forehead despite the cool night air. Her fingers trembled around the pistol's grip, and her thumb moved unconsciously to the trigger guard. "I'm sorry, Ibrahim," she whispered under her breath, the words barely audible even to herself. "I'm so sorry." The weight of what she was about to do crashed over her like a physical blow. This was Ibrahim, her big brother, who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had walked her to school when their parents were working, who had held her hand during their father's funeral. The same Ibrahim who had risked his life to pull their country back from the brink of chaos, who worked 18-hour days to build a better future for millions of people. But they had her children, her beautiful, innocent children who trusted her to keep them safe, who called her name when nightmares woke them, who ran to her arms when the world seemed too frightening to bear. The men who held them had made their ultimatum crystal clear: kill Ibrahim tonight or receive her daughter's severed fingers in tomorrow's mail. Awa raised the pistol with both hands, fighting to control her trembling, and pointed it directly at Ibrahim's sleeping head. The weapon felt impossibly heavy, as if gravity itself was trying to prevent this moment. Time seemed suspended, each second stretching into eternity as she struggled with the impossible choice between brother and children. Then, without warning, a single vibration pulsed against Ibrahim's wrist. His smartwatch, synchronized with the door's security system, had detected the breach despite the disabled motion sensors. The device registered the unauthorized entry and transmitted a silent alert that penetrated even the deepest levels of sleep. Ibrahim's eyes opened instantly, his mind immediately sharp and focused, despite having been unconscious moments before. In one explosive movement, Ibrahim rolled sideways off the bed, his hand shooting out to strike Awa's wrist with devastating precision. The impact sent the pistol flying across the room, where it struck the far wall and skittered under a heavy oak table with a metallic scraping sound that seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence. Awa stumbled backward, her back hitting the wall as shock paralyzed her vocal cords. Ibrahim was already on his feet, his eyes blazing with a combination of fury, betrayal, and something that might have been heartbreak. The president, who moments before had been lost in exhausted slumber, now stood before her like an avenging spirit, every muscle coiled with tension. "Are you insane?" he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You came here to murder me, your own brother!" Awa's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. Her mind reeled with confusion and terror. "You were asleep," she finally managed to stammer. "How did you know? How could you possibly—" "You think I sleep defenseless." Ibrahim's voice was cold, colder than she had ever heard it. "You think 5 years of assassination attempts taught me nothing? I sleep with my finger on a trigger and my ear tuned to every sound in this building." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with 30 years of shared history now poisoned by this single unforgivable act. Ibrahim took a step toward her, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "Answer me, Awa," he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Why would my own blood, my own sister, point a loaded gun at my head while I slept?" Awa's composure finally shattered completely. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the wall to sit on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Her whole body shook with the force of her sobs, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "They have my children, Ibrahim," she whispered. "They have Fatima and little Omar." The words hit Ibrahim like a physical blow. His face changed instantly, rage transforming into something more complex, a mixture of understanding and cold, calculating fury. He stepped back, his eyes narrowing as the full implications of her confession became clear. "Who?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Awa looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Fresh tears glistened on her cheeks as she shook her head frantically. "Please don't ask me that. If I tell you their names, if they suspect I've betrayed them, they'll kill Fatima and Omar without hesitation. They'll make me watch." "No," Ibrahim said, walking slowly toward the pistol on the floor. "If you remain silent, I'll find them anyway, and when I do, I won't just break their hands. I'll tear their entire organization apart brick by brick." He picked up the weapon and examined it with professional detachment, noting the quality of the silencer, the filed-off serial numbers, the hollow point ammunition designed to cause maximum damage. When he looked at Awa again, his expression was unreadable. "You didn't come here to wound me or threaten me," he said with chilling calm. "You came here to execute me in my sleep. This weapon, this ammunition, they wanted to ensure I would never wake up." Awa dropped her head into her hands, her entire body racked with shame. "I didn't want this," she sobbed. "I swear to you on our father's grave, I never wanted this. But they said if I didn't kill you tonight, they would send me pieces of my children, one by one, until I begged them to let me die, too." Ibrahim closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw working as he processed the magnitude of the trap that had been laid for his family. When he opened them again, his decision was made. He walked to the door and opened it fully. "Come," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You're not staying here." "Where are we going?" Awa asked, panic creeping into her voice as she struggled to her feet. Ibrahim didn't look back as he stepped into the corridor. to trap the devils who thought they could use a mother's love as a weapon against me. Ibrahim led Awa through a route that few people knew existed. A hidden passage behind his bedroom that connected to a network of secret corridors built into the palace's original foundation. No security cameras monitored these pathways. No microphones recorded conversations held within their stone walls. They were a relic from more paranoid times when political leaders routinely disappeared in the night, but they served their purpose well in the modern era of electronic surveillance. The passage opened into a small but sophisticated chamber buried deep beneath the palace, a private war room where the most sensitive conversations took place, where real decisions were made away from the prying eyes of foreign intelligence services and domestic spies. The walls were lined with communication equipment, secure terminals, and detailed maps of West Africa marked with pins and colored strings that told the story of ongoing conflicts across the region. Ibrahim locked the heavy door behind them, then activated an electronic jamming system that would prevent any signals from entering or leaving the room without his authorization. Awa stood in the center of the space, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her shattered world together. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she flinched when Ibrahim set the silenced pistol down on the central table with a metallic thunk. "Awa," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "You are my sister. You could have walked into this room any time in the past 5 years and asked for my help with anything. Money, protection, a new identity, passage to another country. Instead, you brought a gun to my bedroom." She couldn't meet his eyes. The shame was too overwhelming, too complete. "Talk," Ibrahim commanded, settling into one of the chairs around the table, but keeping his distance from her. "Tell me everything, every detail, every conversation, every threat. Leave nothing out." Awa swallowed hard, tasting bile as the memories flooded back. "They came to me 2 months ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was picking up Omar from soccer practice when a man approached me in the parking lot. He knew my name, knew the children's names, knew where we lived. At first, I thought it was a joke, some kind of mistaken identity." She paused, shuddering at the memory. "But then he showed me photographs, pictures of Fatima walking to school, Omar playing in our backyard, our house with all the windows and doors clearly marked. They had been watching us for weeks, maybe months. They knew our routine better than I did." Ibrahim's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Continue." "The man said they had a job for me. Something that would benefit all of West Africa," he claimed. When I refused, when I told him to leave us alone, he laughed. He said I didn't understand the situation yet, but I would soon enough. Awa began pacing, nervous energy preventing her from remaining still. The next day, Fatima came home from school crying. Someone had followed her, calling her name, telling her that her mother had secrets that could hurt the whole family. Omar started having nightmares about men in dark cars parked outside his classroom window. "And still you didn't come to me," Ibrahim observed, his tone carefully neutral. "I was terrified," Awa exploded, finally looking at him directly. "You're the president of the country, Ibrahim. You have enemies everywhere, plots against your life every single day. I thought if I involved you, it would only make things worse for my children. I thought I could handle it myself, or that they would eventually lose interest and leave us alone." Ibrahim shook his head slowly. "They were never going to leave you alone, sister. The moment they identified you as my family, your fate was sealed. You became a weapon they could use against me." Awa's voice cracked as she continued. 3 weeks ago, they escalated. I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, no delivery marks. Inside was a lock of Fatima's hair and a note with a simple message. "We can take more than hair." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ibrahim's voice, when he spoke, was barely controlled. "What did they want you to do?" At first, they just wanted information. Details about your schedule, your security arrangements, your personal habits. I refused, and that's when they took the children. Ibrahim leaned forward sharply. When? 4 days ago. Fatima and Omar were supposed to come straight home from school, but they never arrived. I called the school, drove the entire route, contacted their friends' parents. Nothing. Then my phone rang. Awa's hands trembled as she recalled the conversation. A voice, electronically disguised, told me that my children were safe, but that their continued well-being depended entirely on my cooperation. They gave me proof, a recording of Fatima crying, calling for me. Omar's voice in the background, asking why the men wouldn't let him go home. And that's when they gave you the gun, Ibrahim concluded. Awa nodded miserably. They said it would be quick, painless, that you would never know what happened. They promised that afterward, I would be reunited with my children and we could disappear. New identities, money, a fresh start somewhere safe. You believed them? I wanted to believe them, she whispered. What choice did I have? They made it clear that any deviation from their plan, any attempt to contact you or the authorities, would result in my children's immediate execution. Ibrahim stood and walked to one of the wall maps, his finger tracing the borders between Burkina Faso and its neighbors. Did you recognize their accents? Any details about their appearance, their equipment, their methods of communication? The leader had a slight accent, maybe French, possibly Algerian. He wore expensive clothes, military-style boots, and a watch that looked like it cost more than most people make in a year. The others were clearly professionals. They moved like soldiers, spoke in code phrases, and carried weapons I didn't recognize. How many of them? I saw 4 directly, but there were others. Voices on radio communications, references to teams, in different locations. This wasn't some local criminal gang, Ibrahim. This was organized, well-funded, international. Ibrahim turned back to face her, his expression grim. They never intended for you to survive this, Awa. The plan was for you, to kill me, then for them to eliminate you as well. No witnesses, no trail leading back to whoever hired them. Just a tragic family murder-suicide that would devastate the country and create a power vacuum they could exploit. Awa's face went white as the full scope of the manipulation became clear. They were going to kill me too? Almost certainly. And probably your children as well, to eliminate any possibility of future complications. Ibrahim's voice was cold, matter-of-fact. You were never going to walk away from this, sister. You were always intended to be another casualty. The weight of this revelation seemed to crush what remained of Awa's composure. She sank into a chair, her head in her hands, sobbing with renewed intensity. What have I done? What have I done to my family? A sharp knock echoed through the war room, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. It was a code known to only a handful of people, and Ibrahim's expression immediately shifted from contemplation to alertness. He opened a concealed hatch in the ceiling, and Captain Amadou Somé dropped down into the room with fluid grace. The captain was a compact, intense man in his 40s, his face bearing the scars of multiple combat deployments across the Sahel region. His loyalty to Ibrahim was absolute, forged in the fires of 2 previous coup attempts where they had fought, side by side. Sir, Somé reported without preamble, we've been monitoring unusual radio chatter in Sector 4. Someone is coordinating movement near the school where your sister's children attend. Multiple vehicles, sophisticated communication, protocols, and what sounds like preparation for a major operation. Awa gasped audibly, her hands flying to her mouth. They're going to kill them, she whispered. They know I failed, and now they're going to murder my babies. Ibrahim's mind raced through the implications. If the kidnappers were mobilizing near the school, it could mean several things. They were preparing to move the children to a new location. They were setting up for a more dramatic public execution to send a message. or they were implementing a contingency plan for when Awa inevitably failed to check in. "Captain," Ibrahim said, "I need you to coordinate with our special operations team. Full tactical gear but no official vehicles or uniforms. This needs to look like a private security operation, not a government response." "Already done, sir." "Team Alpha is moving into position as we speak, and we have electronic surveillance on all known frequencies in the area." Ibrahim nodded, then turned back to Awa with an expression that was somehow both compassionate and ruthless. "You want redemption for what you nearly did tonight?" Awa looked up at him with desperate hope. "Anything. I'll do anything." "Then you're going to help us bait them. You'll contact your handlers and tell them that the mission was successful, that I'm dead, and you're ready for extraction and reunion with your children." Her hands began trembling again. What if they detect the deception? What if they realize I'm lying and decide to kill Fatima and Omar immediately? Ibrahim placed the silenced pistol back on the table between them. "They won't detect it," he said with cold certainty, "because this time we're the ones setting the trap." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Captain Somé established secure communication links with the tactical team while Ibrahim briefed Awa on exactly what she needed to say and how she needed to say it. Every word of her conversation would be monitored and recorded, every pause analyzed for signs of deception or coercion. "Remember," Ibrahim cautioned as he handed her a specially modified phone that would allow them to track any response, "you are a grieving sister who has just committed the ultimate betrayal for her children. You should sound exhausted, traumatized, but determined to see this through to the end." Awa nodded, though her face was pale with terror. She dialed the number that had been burned into her memory over the past 4 days. It rang only once before a familiar, electronically distorted voice answered. "Is it finished?" Awa took a shaky breath, then delivered her line with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Yes, Ibrahim is dead." A pause. Then, "Good. You performed better than we expected. A car will collect you in 20 minutes. Be ready with whatever personal items you need for travel. You'll be reunited with your children within the hour." The line went dead immediately, leaving Awa staring at the phone with a mixture of relief and terror. "They're coming," she whispered. "No," Ibrahim corrected, his voice taking on a predatory edge that she had never heard before. "They think they're coming for you. What they're actually doing is walking into a carefully prepared killing ground." Captain Somé looked up from his communication equipment. "Sir, we have multiple vehicles converging on the palace perimeter. 2 SUVs, 1 sedan, all with false or missing license plates. They're maintaining radio silence, but our intercepts suggest at least 8 personnel involved in the extraction." Ibrahim studied the tactical display that Somé had activated, showing real-time satellite imagery of the vehicle's approaches. "They're being very cautious," he observed. "Professional spacing, varied routes, electronic countermeasures. Whoever trained these people did an excellent job." "Too bad it won't be enough," Somé replied with grim satisfaction. As the appointed time approached, Awa was fitted with a virtually undetectable audio transmitter woven into the fabric of her dress. The device would broadcast everything she heard to the command center, allowing Ibrahim and his team to monitor the entire operation in real time. "From this point forward," Ibrahim told her, "you say nothing unless directly questioned, and you volunteer no information beyond what they already know. You are not my sister tonight. You are bait, and bait doesn't think, doesn't plan, doesn't improvise, understand?" Awa nodded, though her face showed the strain of what lay ahead. "What happens to me afterward? Even if we save the children, even if we capture these people, I still tried to murder you tonight. I still betrayed everything our family stands for." Ibrahim was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the war room. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of sadness that went beyond the immediate crisis. That depends entirely on what kind of person you choose to be in the next few hours, he said. Tonight you were a mother terrified for her children. Tomorrow you can be a sister who helped expose an international conspiracy against her country. The choice is yours. 23 minutes after the phone call, a sleek black SUV with heavily tinted windows pulled up to a service entrance on the east side of the palace grounds. The vehicle bore no identifying marks, and its occupants remained, invisible behind the darkened glass. According to the plan, palace security had been instructed to allow the vehicle to pass without challenge, supposedly on Ibrahim's direct orders as part of a covert operation. Awa walked toward the SUV with measured steps, flanked by two of Ibrahim's most trusted commandos disguised as civilian palace staff. To any observer, she appeared to be a woman in shock, moving mechanically through the motions of an incomprehensible situation. In reality, every step was calculated, every gesture designed to maintain the illusion while positioning her for maximum intelligence gathering. As she approached the vehicle, the rear window rolled down halfway, revealing a man in his 40s wearing expensive sunglasses despite the darkness. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but she could see enough to note the calculating coldness in his expression. "Get in," he said simply, his accent confirming her earlier assessment. Definitely North African, probably Algerian. Awa climbed into the back seat without a word, settling between the man who had spoken and another operative whose face remained completely hidden. The interior of the SUV smelled of leather and cigarette smoke, and she noticed that all the windows had been modified to prevent anyone from seeing inside. As the vehicle pulled away from the palace, the first man turned to study her more carefully. "You look nervous," he observed, with what might have been amusement. "I just killed my brother," Awa replied, allowing genuine emotion to color her voice. "Of course I'm nervous." "You did well," the man said, his tone almost congratulatory. "Very well. In fact, your brother's death will send shockwaves throughout West Africa. Foreign governments will be forced to intervene to maintain stability, and that's exactly what our employers want." Awa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Your employers?" The man's smile was visible even in the dim light. "People with vision, Mrs. Traoré. People who understand that sometimes a single death can reshape an entire region's future." Back in the underground command center, Ibrahim listened to the conversation through Awa's transmitter with growing fury. Captain Somé monitored the SUVs, progress through the city while coordinating with the tactical teams that were shadowing the vehicle at a discreet distance. "They're not just terrorists or mercenaries," Ibrahim said grimly. "They're talking about foreign government intervention, regional destabilization. This goes much higher than we initially thought." "Sir," Somé reported, "the vehicle is heading toward the industrial district. We have 3 possible destinations based on their current trajectory: an abandoned warehouse, a private airfield, or a compound that our intelligence services have been monitoring for suspected arms trafficking." "My money's on the compound," Ibrahim replied. "They'll want a secure location for the final phase of their operation, somewhere they can eliminate loose ends without witnesses." Inside the SUV, the conversation continued with chilling casualness. The first man, who seemed to be in command of the operation, began discussing plans for the aftermath of Ibrahim's supposed death. "Within 24 hours, there will be protests in the streets," he predicted. "The military will struggle to maintain order without clear leadership. International observers will declare the situation unstable, and our friends in Algeria will offer to assist with peacekeeping operations." Awa's blood ran cold as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "This was never just about killing Ibrahim, was it?" "Oh, no," the man replied with obvious satisfaction. "This was about creating a cascade of events that would justify a complete reorganization of political power in this region. Your brother was just the first domino to fall." The SUV began to slow as it approached what appeared to be an industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. Through the tinted windows, Awa could make out several buildings surrounded by high chain-link fencing, topped with razor wire. The facility looked abandoned, but she noticed that the security lighting was far more sophisticated than would be expected for an unused industrial site. "Where are my children?" she asked as the vehicle came to a stop. The man beside her reached into his coat with practiced smoothness. "You'll see them very soon," he said, his voice taking on an apologetic tone that made Awa's heart skip a beat. "Just one small detail we need to handle first," he continued, withdrawing a compact pistol similar to the one she had carried earlier. "We can't afford to leave loose ends, you understand. Nothing personal." As his finger moved toward the trigger, the entire world exploded into chaos. The SUV was struck from the side by what felt like a freight train, the impact launching the vehicle into a sideways roll that sent bodies and debris flying in all directions. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass was deafening, followed by the acrid smell of leaking fuel and burning rubber. Through the wreckage, Awa heard the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire and saw muzzle flashes lighting up. The darkness. Men were shouting in languages she didn't recognize, and she could hear the distinctive whine of bullets ricocheting off metal surfaces. Then, impossibly, she heard a voice that shouldn't have existed. Ibrahim's voice, clear and commanding above. "The chaos. Secure the area. I want every one of them alive for questioning." Through the spider-webbed rear window of the overturned SUV, Awa saw her brother striding toward the wreckage with the confidence of a man who had just turned his enemy's trap back against them. Captain Somé and a team of heavily armed commandos flanked him, their weapons trained on any survivors who might emerge from the vehicular carnage. "You thought I was dead?" Ibrahim called out to the man who had been about to execute his sister. "Next time, send smarter operatives." The aftermath of the assault was swift and methodical. Within minutes, the surviving operatives had been secured, their weapons confiscated, and their wounded treated just enough to keep them alive for interrogation. Captain Somé emerged from the wreckage with a grim expression, blood staining his left sleeve from a grazing bullet wound. "I'm hit," he reported matter-of-factly, "but it's superficial. Nothing that won't heal." Ibrahim's expression darkened when he saw one of his men lying motionless near the overturned SUV. Corporal Mahi, a young soldier who had served with distinction in 3 counter-terrorism operations, stared sightlessly at the night sky. A single bullet had found its mark during the initial assault. "Mahi's dead," Ibrahim announced quietly, his voice carrying a note of cold fury that made even his own men take notice. The death of any team member was a personal failure in his mind, a life lost, because he hadn't anticipated every possible contingency. Awa crawled out of the SUV's wreckage, her dress torn and her face bleeding from several cuts caused by flying glass. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was beginning to understand the full scope of what had almost happened to her. "They were going to kill me," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "After everything I did, after I nearly murdered you, they were going to put a bullet in my head and dump my body somewhere." "They planned to eliminate everyone who could connect them to tonight's operation," Ibrahim confirmed, kneeling beside the captured operative who had been about to execute his sister. The man's expensive clothes were now torn and bloodied, his professional composure replaced by the dazed confusion of someone whose carefully laid plans had just collapsed catastrophically. Ibrahim searched the man's pockets methodically, retrieving a wallet, a secure smartphone, and a small black flash drive that looked far too sophisticated to be standard criminal equipment. He handed the drive to Captain Somé, who immediately connected it to a ruggedized tablet designed for field operations. "What do we have?" Ibrahim asked as Somé worked to bypass the device's encryption. "Multiple files," Somé replied, his fingers flying over the tablet's keyboard. "Financial records, communication logs, operational plans, personnel files, and a folder labeled Operation Mango Tree." Ibrahim's eyebrows rose slightly. In West African military terminology, mango tree often referred to a gathering place where important decisions were made, a colloquial term for a location where power was exercised. Some opened the operational folder, revealing a treasure trove of intelligence that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Detailed maps of the palace, photographs of Ibrahim's family members, copies of classified security protocols, financial transfers totaling millions of dollars, and most damning of all, a series of encrypted communications that bore the digital signature of a very familiar name. Authorized by B. Buchachi, Some read aloud. Title, President of Algeria. The flash drive revealed a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple assassination plot. The documents detailed a comprehensive plan to destabilize Burkina Faso's government, eliminate its leadership, and create conditions that would justify foreign military intervention. The ultimate goal was the installation of a puppet regime that would provide Algeria with unprecedented influence over West African mineral resources and trade routes. Ibrahim studied the communications with growing rage, recognizing not just the scope of the betrayal, but the casual arrogance with which his murder had been planned. In one particularly damning exchange, President Buchachi had written, "The brother will never suspect his own sister. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be far too late to matter." Another message detailed the psychological manipulation that had been employed. The woman's maternal instincts make her the perfect weapon. She will do anything to save her children, including destroying her own family. Once the deed is done, eliminate her and the children to prevent any inconvenient testimonies. They never intended to honor their agreement, Awa whispered, reading over Ibrahim's shoulder. My children were always going to die. Worse than that, Ibrahim replied grimly. They were counting on me killing you in self-defense when I discovered your betrayal. It would have been the perfect cover story. A tragic family murder-suicide that would leave the nation leaderless and traumatized. Captain Some looked up from the tablet with an expression of professional satisfaction. Sir, we've cracked their operational communications network. I have real-time intelligence on 3 safe houses, 2 extraction points, and what appears to be the location where the children are being held. Ibrahim's demeanor shifted instantly from contemplative to predatory. How many hostiles at the children's location? Thermal imaging suggests 4 guards, plus whoever is directly supervising the children. The facility appears to be a converted warehouse on the city's eastern outskirts. Prep the assault team, Ibrahim ordered. Full tactical gear, but I want those children extracted without a scratch on them. Anyone who has harmed them doesn't leave that warehouse alive. As the team prepared for the rescue operation, Ibrahim turned his attention back to the captured operative, who had regained consciousness and was now staring at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. What's your name? Ibrahim asked conversationally. Fee. Man remained silent, his jaw set in stubborn resistance. Ibrahim knelt down until he was at eye level with the prisoner. I'm going to explain something to you very carefully, he said, in a voice so calm it was almost conversational. In about 30 minutes, I'm going to rescue 2 children who have been terrorized for days because of you and your associates. If I find that they've been harmed in any way, if they're hungry, if they're frightened, if they have so much as a bruise, I will personally ensure that your death takes several very unpleasant hours. The operative's facade of professional composure finally cracked. You can't threaten me like that. There are international laws, diplomatic protocols. Those laws apply to soldiers and legitimate combatants, Ibrahim interrupted. You kidnapped children to force their mother to commit murder. You're not a soldier. You're a terrorist, and terrorists have no protection under any law I recognize. He stood up and brushed imaginary dust from his hands. Captain Some, take our guest to the secure facility. I want him isolated, comfortable, and very much alive until we've resolved this situation. After that, he shrugged eloquently. The warehouse complex where Fatima and Omar were being held sat in an industrial zone that had been largely abandoned since the economic downturn of the previous decade. Most of the surrounding buildings were empty shells, their windows broken and their interiors stripped of anything valuable. It was the perfect location for a clandestine operation, isolated, forgotten, and unlikely to attract unwanted attention. Ibrahim's tactical team approached the target with the silent precision of professional hunters. Years of counter-terrorism, operations across the Sahel had honed their skills to a razor's edge, and tonight they moved like shadows made flesh. Thermal imaging revealed the exact positions of the guards, while electronic surveillance had mapped out the building's interior layout and identified the most likely location of the hostages. The assault began at exactly 0347 hours, with a coordinated breach from 3 different entry points. Flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously, filling the warehouse with blinding light and deafening noise that left the guards disoriented and helpless. Within seconds, Ibrahim's commandos had secured the perimeter and neutralized all resistance. Ibrahim himself led the charge into the building's interior, his weapon ready, but his primary focus on finding the children before any desperate guard could harm them out of spite. He followed the predetermined route to a makeshift holding area in the warehouse's center, where his thermal imaging had indicated the presence of smaller human figures. What he found there nearly broke his heart. Fatima, 8 years old, and Omar, 6, were huddled together in a corner of a small room that had been hastily constructed from shipping containers. They were tied with rope and gagged with cloth, their eyes wide with terror above the makeshift restraints. Both children bore the signs of their ordeal. They were dirty, obviously hungry, and trembling with fear. "It's okay," Ibrahim whispered, as he carefully removed their restraints, his voice gentle despite the fury burning in his chest. "Uncle Ibrahim is here. You're safe now." The moment their gags were removed, both children burst into tears and threw themselves into his arms with desperate intensity. Fatima sobbed against his shoulder while Omar clung to his neck with surprising strength. "We knew you'd come," Fatima managed to say between sobs. "Mama always said you'd never let anything bad happen to us." "Where is Mama?" Omar asked, his 6-year-old voice carrying a burden of confusion and fear that no child should ever have to bear. "Mama is safe," Ibrahim assured him, carefully lifting both children and carrying them toward the exit. "She's waiting for you, and she loves you very much." The tactical operation was completed within 12 minutes from initial breach to full extraction. 4 guards had been captured alive, though 2 required medical attention for injuries sustained during their resistance. A 5th man, apparently the operation's local commander, had chosen to fight rather than surrender and now lay dead among the shipping containers he had used to terrorize innocent children. As Ibrahim emerged from the warehouse carrying Fatima and Omar, Captain Somé approached with an expression of grim satisfaction. "The facility is secure, sir. We've recovered substantial intelligence materials, including detailed plans for follow-up operations that were supposed to be implemented after your death." "What kind of follow-up operations?" "Coordinated attacks on government buildings, assassinations of key military leaders, and what appears to be preparation for a full-scale invasion disguised as a peacekeeping mission." Ibrahim's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. The conspiracy against his government was even more extensive than he had initially realized. This hadn't been just about eliminating him personally. It had been about destroying Burkina Faso's independence entirely. "Sir," Somé continued, "we also found this among the commander's personal effects." He handed Ibrahim a satellite phone that had been modified with military-grade encryption hardware. The device's call log showed multiple communications with numbers registered in Algeria, France, and what appeared to be a private military contractor based in Morocco. They were reporting directly to their handlers, Ibrahim observed. This entire operation was being micromanaged from outside the country. As they prepared to leave the industrial complex, Ibrahim made a decision that would change the trajectory of West African politics for years to come. Instead of handling this crisis through traditional diplomatic channels, instead of allowing the conspiracy to be buried in classified reports and behind closed-doors negotiations, he was going to expose everything to the world. The Presidential Palace's media center had been designed for routine press conferences and ceremonial announcements, but in the early hours of that morning, it became the launch point for a political earthquake that would resonate across 3 continents. Ibrahim sat alone at a simple wooden desk, deliberately eschewing the formal podium and ceremonial trappings that usually accompanied presidential addresses. He wore a plain military shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his appearance designed to convey authenticity rather than authority. Behind him hung a single flag, not the presidential standard, but the national colors of Burkina Faso. The camera began, rolling at exactly 0600 hours, broadcasting live to television stations across Africa and streaming simultaneously to social media platforms around the world. Ibrahim had personally insisted on the widest possible distribution, knowing that the powerful forces he was about to expose would do everything possible to suppress or discredit his revelations. He looked directly into the camera lens and began to speak without notes, without a teleprompter, without the careful diplomatic language that usually characterized international political communications. "Last night," he said simply, "while I was sleeping in my own bedroom, someone tried to kill me. Not a terrorist, not a foreign assassin, but my own sister." The words hit the airwaves like a thunderclap. In television studios across Africa, anchors struggled to process what they were hearing. Social media platforms exploded with shocked reactions as viewers tried to comprehend the unprecedented nature of this confession. Ibrahim leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining calm but carrying an undercurrent of controlled fury. "My sister didn't try to murder me because she hated me, or because she disagreed with my policies, or because she had been radicalized by extremist ideology. She pointed a loaded gun at my sleeping head, because foreign operatives kidnapped her children and threatened to kill them unless she killed me." He paused, allowing the full impact of his words to register with his global audience. The mastermind behind this operation is a man who calls himself a fellow African leader. President Bouchachi of Algeria, working with foreign intelligence, services, and private military contractors, orchestrated a plan to assassinate me, eliminate my family, and create the political chaos necessary to justify foreign intervention in my country. Ibrahim held up the flash drive that had been recovered from the captured operative, its small black surface reflecting the studio lights. This device contains irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. Financial records, operational plans, communication, logs, and direct orders from President Bouchachi's office. The evidence is so comprehensive, so damning, that even the most sophisticated propaganda machine cannot explain it away. He stood up from the desk and walked closer to the camera, his presence filling the frame with an intensity that made viewers feel as if he were speaking directly to them. "President Bouchachi, you made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed that I would sleep through my own assassination, that I would kill my sister in self-defense, that I would break under the weight of family tragedy and leave my country vulnerable to your manipulation." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You were wrong on every count." The camera angle widened as Awa entered the frame, her appearance showing the physical and emotional toll of the previous night's events. Her face bore cuts from the SUV crash. Her clothes were torn and stained, but her posture radiated a newfound strength that hadn't been there before. "My sister will now speak," Ibrahim announced, "not as a traitor who nearly killed her brother, but as a mother who was used as a weapon by foreign powers who think African families can be manipulated and discarded at will." Awa stepped forward, her voice initially trembling but gaining strength as she continued. "They told me it would be quick, that Ibrahim would never feel any pain. They gave me a gun with a silencer and promised that afterward I would be reunited with my children, and we could disappear to safety." She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much in the past few hours. It was all lies. They never intended to return my children. They never planned to let me live. I was nothing more than a disposable tool, designed to be discarded the moment I had served my purpose. Her voice grew stronger, more defiant. But I'm not disposable. My children are not expendable. My brother is not as weak as these foreign powers assumed, and Burkina Faso will not be conquered by men in expensive suits who think they can play games with African lives. She stepped back, allowing Ibrahim to retake center stage. To every foreign intelligence service, every private military contractor, every corrupt politician who thinks they can treat African nations as their personal playground, Ibrahim said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, understand this. We are not asleep anymore. We see your operations, we know your methods, and we will not allow you to destroy our families to achieve your political goals. He walked back to the desk and picked up an official document bearing multiple seals and signatures. I have filed formal charges against President Buchachi with the International Criminal Court, the African Union, and the Economic Community of West African States. But I will not wait for international bureaucrats to deliver justice. The document was set aside with deliberate ceremony. If Algeria's government wants to explain why their president ordered the kidnapping of children and the assassination of a fellow African leader, they are welcome to do so publicly. If France wants to clarify their role in providing intelligence, support for this operation, I invite them to address their own parliament and people. Ibrahim's expression shifted, becoming almost contemplative. But understand this above all else. The era of foreign powers treating Africa as a collection of client states to be manipulated and controlled is ending. We will defend ourselves, we will expose those who threaten us, and we will ensure that the world knows the truth about who is really destabilizing this continent. The broadcast continued for another 20 minutes, with Ibrahim methodically presenting evidence, detailing the scope of the conspiracy, and making it clear that his government possessed far more intelligence about foreign interference than anyone had previously suspected. When the camera finally stopped rolling, the political landscape of West Africa had been fundamentally altered. The international reaction to Ibrahim's broadcast was swift and explosive. Within hours of the transmission ending, emergency meetings were being convened in capitals across 3 continents as governments scrambled to assess the implications of the unprecedented revelations. In Algiers, President Buchachi's administration initially attempted to dismiss Ibrahim's claims as desperate propaganda from a failing regime. However, as independent media outlets began analyzing the evidence that Ibrahim had made publicly available, their denials became increasingly untenable. By noon, Buchachi had canceled all public appearances and retreated to his private residence, under what his staff described as security concerns. French government spokesmen initially claimed that their intelligence services had no knowledge of any operations targeting Burkina Faso's leadership, but leaked diplomatic cables soon revealed that senior French officials had been briefed on Algeria's plans weeks before the assassination attempt. The revelation sparked immediate protests in Paris and forced the Prime Minister to address the National Assembly in emergency session. The response across Africa was overwhelmingly supportive of Ibrahim's decision to expose the conspiracy. Leaders from Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and Mali issued joint statements condemning foreign interference in African affairs and calling for a comprehensive investigation of similar operations across the continent. The African Union announced the formation of a special commission to examine evidence of foreign manipulation in African political processes. But perhaps the most significant immediate impact was felt in the streets of Ouagadougou itself. As news of the night's events spread, thousands of citizens gathered outside the presidential palace not to protest or demand explanations, but to show support for their leader and his family. Many carried signs reading "Africa for Africans" and "No more foreign puppets." Inside the palace, a very different kind of reckoning was taking place. Awa sat in a private room adjacent to the medical wing, holding her children close as a physician, examined them for any signs of serious harm. Physically, Fatima and Omar had escaped their ordeal relatively unscathed. They were dehydrated and exhausted, but bore no injuries that wouldn't heal quickly. Psychologically, however, the impact would likely last much longer. "Mama," Fatima asked quietly, "why did those men take us? What did we do wrong?" Awa felt her heart break at the innocent question. How could she explain to an 8-year-old that she had become a target simply because of who her uncle was, that her childhood had been shattered because foreign powers saw her as a useful tool in their political games? "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," she said, stroking her daughter's hair. "Sometimes bad people do terrible things, but that doesn't mean you're responsible for their actions." Ibrahim appeared in the doorway, his expression softer than it had been since this crisis began. He had changed out of his military shirt into civilian clothes, and for the first time in hours, he looked more like an uncle than a president. "How are they doing?" he asked the physician. "Physically, they'll recover completely within a few days. Emotionally, that will take longer. I recommend counseling, careful monitoring for signs of trauma, and as much stability and normalcy as possible." Ibrahim nodded, then approached the small family group carefully. Both children looked up at him with expressions that mixed relief, confusion, and lingering fear. "Uncle Ibrahim," Omar said in his small voice, "Mama said she had to do something bad to save us. Is that true?" The question hung in the air like a sword, cutting to the heart of the moral complexities that had defined the past 24 hours. Ibrahim knelt down so that he was at the children's eye level, choosing his words with extraordinary care. "Your mama loves you more than anything in the world," he said simply. "When bad people threatened to hurt you, she was willing to do anything, even terrible things, to keep you safe. That's what parents do." "But she didn't hurt you," Fatima observed with the clarity that children sometimes possess. "No, she didn't," Ibrahim agreed. "Because sometimes, when we're facing impossible choices, we find that there are better options than we initially realized." He looked at Awa, who was watching the conversation with tears streaming down her face. "Your mama made mistakes," he continued, "but she also helped stop very bad people from hurting other families the way they hurt yours. She chose to be brave when it mattered most." Over the following days, as the political crisis continued to unfold on the international stage, Ibrahim and Awa began the much more personal work of rebuilding their family relationship. The conversations were difficult, sometimes painful, but ultimately necessary. "I understand why you felt you couldn't. Come to me," Ibrahim told his sister during one of their private discussions. "I've spent so much time being the president, the military leader, the symbol of national strength, that I forgot how to be a brother you could turn to for help." Awa shook her head. "That's not your fault, Ibrahim. I let fear make my decisions, instead of trust. I should have known that you would move heaven and earth to protect Fatima and Omar." "But you were right to be afraid," Ibrahim insisted. "My position as president does put my family at risk. That's not something I can change, but it is something I can prepare for better." They discussed practical measures, enhanced security for Awa and the children, safe houses that could be activated in emergency situations, communication protocols that would allow them to reach him instantly if threats emerged. But more importantly, they talked about rebuilding the emotional bonds that had been damaged by years of political pressure and the terrible events of recent days. "I want to help," Awa said during one of these conversations. "Not just with family matters, but with what you're doing for the country. I've seen now what foreign powers are willing to do to African families, and I want to fight back." Ibrahim studied his sister's face, noting the steel that had emerged from her ordeal. "It won't be safe," he warned. If you become publicly associated with my administration, you'll remain a target for anyone who wants to hurt me." "I'm already a target," Awa replied with a bitter smile. "The difference is that now I know it, and I'm angry instead of afraid." 3 weeks after the failed assassination attempt, the full scope of the international conspiracy began to emerge as intelligence. Services across Africa coordinated their investigations. What Ibrahim had initially believed to be an isolated plot against his government proved to be part of a much larger campaign of foreign interference spanning multiple countries. Similar operations had been attempted or planned in Mali, Niger, Guinea, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In each case, the same basic methodology had been employed: identify vulnerable family members of political leaders, create leverage through kidnapping or threats, then use that leverage to force cooperation with foreign political objectives. The revelations sparked what African media began calling the Truth War, a continent-wide effort to expose and counter foreign manipulation of African political processes. Ibrahim found himself at the center of this movement, not by choice, but by circumstance, as other leaders looked to him for guidance on how to resist external pressure while maintaining national sovereignty. "We're fighting for the soul of Africa," he told a gathering of West African leaders in Accra. "Not with guns or bombs, but with transparency, with truth, and with the courage to stand up to powers that think they can treat us like children." The evidence recovered from the assassination plot had provided African intelligence services with unprecedented insight into the methods and networks used by foreign operatives. Cell phone records, financial transfers, operational communications, and personnel files painted a detailed picture of how external powers recruited local assets, funded operations, and coordinated complex multinational campaigns. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of what became known as the Ouagadougou Protocols, a comprehensive framework for African nations to share intelligence about foreign interference, coordinate responses to external threats, and provide mutual support for leaders facing manipulation or coercion. "For too long, we've been fighting these battles alone," Ibrahim explained to Captain Somé as they reviewed intelligence reports from across the region. Each country dealing with foreign pressure in isolation, never realizing that the same operatives, the same methods, the same funding sources were being used against all of us. The protocols established secure communication networks, joint intelligence operations, and rapid response mechanisms that could be activated when any member nation faced external threats. More importantly, they created a shared database of known operatives, front organizations, and financial networks used by foreign powers to destabilize African governments. "We're building something that's never existed before," Somé observed. "An African intelligence network that serves African interests instead of foreign ones." The international reaction to these developments was predictably hostile. Western media outlets began running stories about increasing authoritarianism in West Africa and the dangerous militarization of African politics. European politicians warned about the deteriorating security situation and the need for international oversight of African governance. But Ibrahim had anticipated these responses and developed counter-strategies that turned the propaganda war back on its originators. "When they accuse us of authoritarianism," he told his communications team, "we release more evidence of their attempts to manipulate our democratic processes. When they claim we're militarizing politics, we show the world the weapons and training they provided to destabilize our governments." The strategy proved devastatingly effective. Each attempt to discredit African leaders backfired as more evidence emerged of foreign interference. Public opinion in Europe and North America began to shift as citizens realized that their own governments had been systematically undermining African sovereignty while publicly supporting democracy and human rights. 6 months after the failed assassination attempt, Ibrahim stood on the balcony of his private residence, watching his nephew Omar play soccer in the secure courtyard below. The boys' laughter echoed off the walls, a sound that had become increasingly precious as the family worked to heal from their shared trauma. Awa approached from inside the house, carrying a secure phone that had been buzzing insistently for the past few minutes. "It's the Secretary General of the African Union," she said, handing him the device. "He says it's urgent." Ibrahim accepted the call, listening carefully as the situation was explained. A coup attempt was underway in Gabon, orchestrated by the same network of foreign operatives that had been exposed through the Burkina Faso investigation. The Gabonese president was requesting immediate assistance under the Ouagadougou protocols. "We can have a response team airborne within 2 hours," Ibrahim told the Secretary General. "But this time we go public immediately. No secret operations, no diplomatic cover-ups. The world needs to see how these networks operate." As he ended the call, Awa studied his expression with the insight that only family members possess. "You're not just responding to a crisis anymore, are you?" she observed. "You're building something bigger." Ibrahim nodded slowly. "We're building the future, sister. A future where African children don't get kidnapped to force their parents into betraying their countries. A future where foreign powers can't treat our nations as disposable game pieces." He looked down at Omar, who had momentarily forgotten the trauma of his ordeal in the simple joy of childhood play. That boy down there shouldn't have to live in a world where his family connections make him a target for international conspiracies. No African child should. The secure phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Captain Somé reporting that the response team was ready for deployment. Ibrahim read the message, then looked at his sister with an expression that mixed determination with sadness. "The work isn't finished," he said simply. "It may never be finished. But at least now we're fighting back instead of just surviving." Awa nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. The assassination attempt had ended, the immediate conspiracy had been exposed, but the larger struggle for African sovereignty would continue for years or decades to come. "The children and I are ready to help however we can," she said. "This family has paid too high a price to let foreign powers continue their games unopposed." As Ibrahim prepared to leave for another crisis, another battle in the ongoing war for African independence, he reflected on how much had changed since that night when his sister had pointed a gun at his sleeping head. The trauma had been real, the betrayal had cut deep, but from that darkness had emerged something unprecedented, a unified African response to foreign manipulation that was already changing the balance of power across the continent. The story, that had begun with a sister's impossible choice, had become something far larger. A testament to the power of truth over manipulation, family bonds over foreign pressure, and African unity over divide-and-conquer strategies that had dominated the continent for centuries. As his helicopter lifted off from the palace grounds, Ibrahim looked down at his homeland with a mixture of pride and determination. The immediate battle had been won, but the war for Africa's future was just beginning. And for the first time in years, he believed that victory was not only possible, but inevitable. The truth, once unleashed, could not be contained. And the truth was that Africa was no longer asleep. Sometimes the deepest betrayals come not from hate, but from fear. Yet even in darkness, redemption is possible when truth leads the way. This story isn't just about Ibrahim Traoré. It's a warning to every power that hides behind manipulation and fear. Africa is no longer asleep. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, share it with someone who needs to hear the truth behind the headlines. Your support helps bring more bold African stories to light. Stay strong, stay awake, and remember, sometimes survival is the loudest form of resistance.